Thank you so much. This is an incredible opportunity to be here to speak to you all. This is a room of a lot of experience. One of the things I was thinking about coming into this was just all of the objects that we have worked on and seen as a group together, and what that is kind of globally and in terms of the historical importance and the cultural importance. So I think that's pretty amazing to think about. I did want to take a quick moment to talk a little bit about my background before jumping into this. This is some research I've been working on for the past few years. So my undergraduate degree is in fine art photography. And 10 years ago, I kind of happened into an internship at the Smithsonian Museum Conservation Institute. I was working with a senior conservator turned imaging specialist. He found the importance of imaging for conservation and research. And so he trained me on site in the computational and scientific imaging techniques. And then in the past 5 years, I've actually been pursuing a master's and PhD in imaging science, looking at research and conservation documentation. So the next 20 minutes will be a very quick summary of the research that I've been working on. So if you have additional questions, please come up, talk to me during the conference. So this research is looking at wavelength and sharpness to improve image-based 3D reconstruction as scientific records for conservation documentation. And this has been a part of my PhD research at the University of Brighton, University College of London, as part of the Science and Engineering and Arts Heritage and Archaeology Center for Doctoral Training. That is funded by the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council in the UK. So those are the acronyms that are kind of splayed across here. And I'm working as a digital imaging specialist at the Smithsonian Museum Conservation Institute, which I did not say a little bit earlier. So during the time of this research, I've identified 3 main categories for museum imaging. And these are not new. This is not going to change how we work. But I think it's a really useful way to look at the imaging that's happening within cultural heritage institutions. And so those 3 main categories are collections, photography, conservation documentation, and museum imaging. And I see that these areas are defined by different techniques, workflows, and applications, but they're absolutely interrelated and overlap. So museum imaging incorporates interdisciplinary cultural heritage documentation and contributions from many fields. And this helps with the continued development of the imaging techniques and technologies. And I think understanding how these fields and categories connect and overlap encourages the refinement and the development of these techniques and technologies, benefiting those different areas of imaging. So I see that my research and my work is at the intersection of these museum imaging areas. So collections, photography, conservation documentation, and scientific imaging. And the research is borrowing methods from those different areas in order to improve image-based 3D reconstruction as scientific records for conservation documentation. Oh, multitasking. Oh, nope, too far. So the research has focused on accessible consumer imaging systems. Spectral and 3D imaging techniques are being used for museum imaging, with accessible devices and workflows being adopted by non-expert users. So these users are having digital cameras modified as accessible devices for spectral imaging, and they're adapting automated and flexible image-based modeling workflows for 3D imaging. So components that make these accessible and flexible are also contributing to the challenges of maintaining reliability and accuracy of the reconstruction. So with the aim of creating reliable and accurate scientific records, the research is exploring optimization of the image-based 3D reconstruction. It's focusing on small to medium-sized objects, and it's looking at selecting wavelengths and focusing on sharpness to improve output. So the research is investigating whether selected wavelengths within visible or beyond can provide an enhanced view of that object or that feature in order to improve the recording of the surface geometry. So the idea is that increased local contrast is taking advantage, or by selecting wavelengths, we're able to increase the local contrast by taking advantage of the fact that materials may respond differently to different wavelengths. So this particular object is from the Smithsonian American Art Museum. I'm showing you kind of the backside of it, but it's throughout several slides. It's carved, varnished, and painted walnut sculpture of a coyote sitting on a turtle. It dates after 1930, and it's thought to portray a Hopi or a Native American tale about a turtle tricking a coyote into helping him home after he has foolishly left the river. So the sculpture has a crack running along the shoulder of the coyote down to the foot of the coyote, and you can see it pretty noticeably in the shell of the turtle. So the conservators are concerned about the fluctuating environmental parameters within the galleries and how that might impact that crack, increasing it or potentially decreasing it depending on those parameters. And so the imaging of this particular object was aiming to provide a detailed baseline image set for monitoring the dimensional change, but it was also looking into the possibilities of spectral and 3D imaging to improve or help with monitoring. So this object is dark and reflective, which are both fairly challenging for optical techniques in the visible. So accurate and precise instrumentation for spectral imaging exists, but the cost and complexity of these can keep these out of reach for certain institutions, professionals, collections. So we're seeing that heritage professionals are using modified digital cameras as accessible devices for imaging. And so these offer inexpensive, portable, easy to use, high resolution options for doing conservation documentation. So the silicone sensors that are at the heart of these consumer cameras are actually inherently sensitive from near UV into the near IR, but they're optimized for color visible light photography by having an IR cut filter in front of the sensor and then also having the color filters on the sensor in order to create that color image. So by removing these filters, the cameras actually provide capabilities for spectral imaging while maintaining those user-friendly kind of handling properties of the consumer digital camera. So you can use accessories that you already have, potentially use software that you already have, and that you're using with a standard unmodified camera. So the three main conversions that are available for the most part with the first two that are listed are the single wavelength and the full spectrum. And that's just the removal of the IR cut filter, and in some cases you can replace it with another filter. So if you wanted to just look at a very specific range, that would be a single wavelength conversion. The full spectrum is gonna just be removing the IR cut filter. You still have the color filter array in place on the sensor, so you're still recording the red, green, and blue channels, but you have sensitivity into the near infrared. The most destructive is the monochrome conversion, which is actually removing the color filter array from the sensor surface. So that's removing 5 microns from the surface. It is very destructive and very invasive. So the question comes up, how does this modification actually impact the quality of the images coming out of this camera? How is it impacting both the 2D image quality and then also the 3D reconstruction? And then how can this device, the modified camera, be quantified as a scientific tool for recording and monitoring cultural heritage objects? So the modified camera was characterized to look at that impact of the modification and also to look at it as a device, as a scientific tool. The characterization included the assessment of 2D image quality and also measuring the spectral sensitivity. So the 2D image quality assessment, I used the Federal Agency's Digitization Guidelines Initiative, FADGI, and the targets and software associated with that, with the device level digital imaging conformance evaluation target. So I'll refer to that target on the left as the DICE target. And I was mostly looking at noise, sharpness, and resolution. And so that's measuring visual noise, spatial frequency response, and then the sampling efficiency. For characterizing or measuring the spectral sensitivity, I was using a method that was filtering the camera and recording images with the filters that are represented in the bottom. So looking at both the visible and near infrared range and being able to measure the sensitivity of the camera. So with looking at this characterization, it was really important to be acquiring raw image files. So this is essential for many reasons, but specifically important for characterizing the camera, assessing the 2D image quality, and then also using the device as a scientific tool. So we needed to come up with a raw processing workflow that would take into account the modification of the camera. So the images are no longer red, green, and blue RGB images. So we wanted the raw processing to reflect that change. So we needed something that was going to produce a 16-bit TIFF following a linear process without demosaicing, which then led us to find that there was actually a pixel level pattern that was residual, most likely from the modification. So we added in flat field correction, which is fairly standard anyway, but to reduce the effect of that pixel level pattern that was then showing up because of the modification. So the results of the characterization showed an increase in noise, and that was because the raw processing workflow that I came up with didn't have noise reduction, which would have been in place in other kind of raw processing workflows, so that would be something that I would need to improve. It also increased the effective resolution, but at the risk of aliasing. So the modification of the camera included the removal of the color filter array, that 5 microns of the surface. It also included the removal of the anti-aliasing filter or the optical low-pass filter. So both of those would cause the spatial frequency response to increase and also the sampling efficiency to go over 100%. With the spectral sensitivity, the camera was actually very sensitive in the shorter wavelengths around blue, 400 nanometers, with it being about 4 times the sensitivity within the near infrared region of the camera, so around 950 nanometers. So circling back around to the wavelength selection, the idea of acquiring an image of the object or the feature that is increasing the local contrast. So this requires looking at both the object and also the imaging system that you're using. So in terms of the object, you need to know a little bit about the object materials and the surface properties. In terms of the imaging systems, you need to understand the transmission of the filters, the sensitivity of the camera, and then also the output of the illumination. So that information was coming out of the characterization of the camera. And so by looking at the combination of how the materials are responding to the different wavelengths and also understanding where the camera is going to perform best, you can select wavelengths in order to input that into the image-based 3D reconstruction to improve the surface geometry. So for this particular object, the coyote and turtle, we took single images with the different filters and found that with reflected infrared, so around 800 nanometers, we're actually able to see the crack a lot better. So we're increasing that local contrast, and tests did show that we were improving the image-based 3D reconstruction of this particular object. So another aspect of the research was looking at depth of field and sharpness in order to optimize the image-based 3D reconstruction. So 3D reconstruction processes are assuming that the object is acceptably sharp throughout the input image set. But the limited depth of field is a known issue with 2D imaging and 3D imaging, especially of small objects. So depth of field is well understood in the context of 2D imaging, but it's considered and is absolutely considered when acquiring images for 3D reconstruction. But the depth of field calculations for 2D imaging are not well connected to 3D reconstruction and the resulting 3D reconstruction quality. So the work that we were doing was looking at the influence of depth of field and sharpness on the 3D reconstruction, specifically looking at aperture, angle, and distance. And that was to better understand those parameters and also provide evidence of the limitations of depth of field relating to 3D. So the lab-based tests that we were looking at, or that we were working on, were using a planar surface, just a flat plane, with a pseudo-random pattern that has a pretty high contrast, a high local contrast, that's been optimized for image matching. So we recorded both the DICE target to look at the 2D image quality assessment, and then also the plane for 3D reconstruction. And this was to tie that image quality assessment to the 3D reconstruction in order to better understand how that was going to impact the 3D reconstruction. So another part of this was to increase the reproducibility of the camera positions going into that image-based 3D reconstruction. So we created a robot, the camera positioning robot, that's 2 linear stages and a rotational stage so that all the input camera networks that are going into that are the same. And we were able to do that in order to look at the parameters of angle, aperture, and distance. So the FADGI star rating for sampling efficiency and spatial frequency were used as a point of reference for the 2D image quality. And these image sets were used to link to the 3D reconstruction. But it's absolutely recognized that I'm only using 2 parameters from the FADGI star rating, and that more could change what that rating result would be. So these results up here are actually looking at depth of field and distance. The camera was incrementally moved away from the target at 5 millimeter increments. And the 2D image quality was assessed, specifically looking at spatial frequency response and sampling efficiency. And so this is looking at the DICE target results, and it is looking at a better definition for the amount of blur that we can tolerate in terms of the 3D reconstruction, or the value of the circle of confusion. So depth of field for 2D imaging is calculated using this value, and the widely accepted value for this permissible blur is about 30 microns. So the previous slide was the 2D image quality results, and looking at how those declined as you moved farther away from the target. And these are looking at the 3D reconstruction results of that plane. So the gray box is looking at the FADGI star rating. That's the only one that fell within the FADGI star rating. The white box is looking at what falls into the 2D depth of field, and this is for an aperture of f5.6. You can also see the center feature of the DICE target at the bottom. So by the time you get to 50 millimeters from the point of focus, you can't read what's on it. So that's just to give you a visual indication of that distance. So these results are showing kind of the 2 extremes for what could be chosen for the diameter of the circle of confusion, or what that permissible blur would be. And so for the FADGI star rating, it's going to be quite small. It's about 1/3 of what the standard would be. And that's going to give you a very limited depth of field. But then on the other side, the 3D reconstruction actually was able to provide okay results, even at 50 millimeters. And so that's giving you a much larger value for the circle of confusion and an extended depth of field. However, the test object that I was using has very high local contrast. So the 3D reconstruction was pretty successful, and so that test object is very resilient for these tests. So it's not representative heritage objects. So the resulting 3D reconstruction is absolutely dependent on the surface of the object. And so that actually ties back into the wavelength selection that was previously talked about, and improving the local contrast of the object. So looking at these 2 directions of both wavelength selection and sharpness in order to improve the image-based 3D reconstruction. Nope. So the 2 aspects of the research that I wanted to share were the wavelength selection and the use of the modified camera, and then increasing our understanding of depth of field for 3D reconstruction. So the wavelength selection and the modified camera pointed to the importance of that camera characterization and better understanding both the modification of the camera and how that's impacting the image quality, but also how it can be used as a scientific device, and where the sensitivity is, and that combination of the imaging system and then the object in order to create better input images for the image-based 3D reconstruction. And the depth of field investigation, I wanted to share that because it's tying in the FADGI guidelines and the 2D image quality assessment in kind of a different way, to see how that can help to inform depth of field for 3D reconstruction. A really important part of this research that I didn't have time to really touch on is about reliable reference data and accuracy assessment. A lot of these tests are based on accuracy assessment, and then that requires reliable reference data, which is really challenging with cultural heritage objects. So that opens up a whole new discussion. It may be something that comes up this afternoon in the panel discussion led by Scott Geffert from the Met. So I wanted to finish up with a final thought touching on kind of the museum imaging and the categories of museum imaging. So that's the collections photography, the conservation documentation, and museum imaging. And so for this research, it was important because that's where I feel like the research and the work that I do sits, at that intersection, borrowing the methods to improve the image-based 3D reconstruction as scientific records for conservation documentation. But I think it's also important in thinking about how museum imaging develops within the field, how we can borrow methods to improve what we're doing, and also how we can come together to work on standards to improve the documentation of our shared heritage. And a final thank you to the people that have been involved with this project. Of course, I'm the one that is standing up here and presenting, but there's a lot of support that goes into research projects like this, including a lot of institutions and a lot of people. So thank you very much.
Everything is so, everyone is very good in the time schedule. I have my 5 minutes, but I don't need them. For the second presentation, I would like to invite Marco and Fabrizio.
Morning, everybody. I am Marco, and I will present. And when our presentation will be finished, my colleague Fabrizio could show you the application on his laptop. It is possible doing the PowerPoint. Okay, my presentation is about the use of 3D techniques to understand the Leonardo da Vinci's drawings, and this is the result of a group from many institutions in Italy and also small companies specialized in high-quality LED lighting. The problem that we face is the fine drawings visualization, understanding, and analysis. And the solution is ISLE inside Leonardo, an application to analyze drawings as graphic artifacts that we developed from 2011, and the development is still alive today. Okay, as case study, we have 3 beautiful Leonardo da Vinci drawings that I quickly present. The first is the very popular the Vitruvian Man, that is probably the most famous existing drawing that we acquired in 2014 at the Galleria dell'Accademia in Venice. The drawing presents also a nice back that unveils the copying work of the painter Giuseppe Bossi at the beginning of 19th century. The second one is the landscape 5 August 1473 that we acquired in 2018 at Cabinet of Drawing and Stamp at Uffizi in Florence. That, in the word of Martin Kemp, is probably the first landscape in the Western art and also the first drawing of Leonardo da Vinci. Also, this drawing that is sized practically as an A4 paper sheet, presents a nice back. The last drawing is a study for the background of the Adoration of the Magi that is also at Uffizi in Florence, that we acquired also in 2018. And that is a study for the higher part of the Leonardo masterpiece, The Adoration of the Magi. Okay, this is the back of the drawing, but we go quickly to ISLE. What is the goal of ISLE is to improve tracings and etchings analysis to understand the artist's graphic method and the drawing features. The target of ISLE are both scholar and restorer and the exhibition and museums visitors. What is the idea of the ground of ISLE? It to allow to the user to experience the drawing as if it were in his hands. The output is a digital copy of the physical drawing, perceptually indistinguishable from the original and manipulable using gestures. The solution from a technical point of view is the acquisition, real-time rendering, and the interaction of the drawing's total appearance. ISLE is based on some observation that could be stupid in this context, but okay, for example, for what concerns the color gamut, The spectrum of color in a drawing is much narrower than the spectrum of color in a painting. For this reason, in our opinion, multispectral techniques not offer significant advantages also for tracing definition, and we decided to use a colorimetric reproduction. Also, for what concerns the depth information, if you try to see this part of the Vitruvian Man, for example, we can find thickness left by pens and pencil that range between 5 to 10 microns. And for this reason, laser scanner techniques are not effective because the maximum lateral spatial resolution possible range between 15 to 16 microns. For this reason, we decided to simulate the surface feature using computer graphics techniques from images. Okay, the modeling of the structure appearance is then very important. We used the model proposed by West and Harvey Torrance in this paper of 1992 that organized the structure appearance in macrostructure, the mesostructure, that are the small details and bumps, and the microstructure, that is the light reflection orientation. For the drawing, the most important are mesostructure and microstructure. The workflow includes the 3 modules. The first is the acquisition, an accurate and safe on-site image capture. The second is an high-fidelity real-time rendering of the total appearance of the drawing. And the third concerns the interaction. It is an adaptation of traditional multi-touch interaction paradigm to fit the exploration of 2D, 3D contents. Okay, some in-depth about the data capture that include the system capture characterization, the resolution characterization, the color correction, and the image post-processing. I do some information about the camera selection, the light selection, the color correction, and I show some result about the MTF. Okay, for what concerns the capture device, to accurately capture the Leonardo Sinner's sign, is required for this drawing a resolution of 8,000 by 5,500 pixels, and a color quality of 48-bit. We used a large format scanning back-based Renkai direct camera system that present a maximum optical resolution of 8,000 by 30,000 pixels, and more interesting for us because we not have interpolation of the signal each pixel because the sensor is trilinear. The signal is very cleaned, and this is important not only for the color, but mainly for the shape reconstruction. Okay, for what concerns the lighting system, in 2014, we started with a standard solution, practically some fluorescent light. But we observed, seeing the spectral power distribution, the presence of frequencies in which the response is limited, mainly in the area of the yellow. This is not good to acquire drawings because this is an important color area. Okay. Also, it's possible to have UV lighting, and also this is not good for the drawings. Okay, for this reason, we moved in 2018 to a new solution that consists in 16 high-flux single LED white light that present a spectral power distribution that is much better along the whole spectrum of the visible light, and more no IR and UV wavelength light components. The solution also presents light spectral properties that are consistent from shot to shot and year to year, a limited wave, and a quick setup and limited space required. As you can see in this slide, on the left you can see the previous solution, and on the right the new solution, just 2 square meters and limited power. Okay. We also evaluate the level of illumination during the Photoshop to ensure the safety of the drawings. This is very important. In the 2014 solution, the equivalent gallery time at 50 lux was more or less 14 hours. And with the new solution of 2018, the equivalent gallery time at 50 lux decreased to 5 hours. That is a very limited time, and this is a safety solution for the drawing. Okay. For what concerns the color reproduction, we used the 5 rules of colorimetric imaging that Professor Roy Burns stated in this same conference 4 years ago. We just skipped this step because the independent validation using target not used for camera profiling is not easy. Is not an easy step, and you can have also unstable results. And we decided to use the same target used for calibration, adding the expert observer judgment on many monitors and the lighting condition of the room. Okay. For what concerns the color correction, we have our software, so-called SHAFT, Saturation and Hue Adaptive Fine-Tuning, that is a target-based technique that is based on the Bruce Fraser calibration procedure, but not require Adobe Photoshop because it was developed in MATLAB and supported by DCRO, and could be usable alone or coupled with a polynomial regression. More detail you can find in these 2 papers if you are interested, of 2018 and 2017. Okay. As target, we used an old-fashioned solution that is the very popular X-Rite Color Checker Classic. We know so well that the color correction for subject predominated by near neutrals and limited color is a problem, where the typical solution is a collection-specific color test targets. We tried to use the solution by Don Williams that illustrated in this paper of 2012, but we obtained unstable results because candidate color selection is not easy and can lead to having greater errors. This is a true problem for drawing where you have a very limited set of color. Okay, for this reason, as I said, we use a solution based on observer judgment and a weighted version of the shaft to better fit the color existing in the drawings. Here I can show some results. Okay, this is the Delta E 2000 results. For the version of shaft no weighted, the results are so good, but we have problem in the red color area. Okay, and that's are the results for the weighted version of the shaft. The mean color accuracy is practically the same, but the result in the red area of the color are much better. Okay. Quickly, the resolution characterization. We used the standard MTF test that obtaining good results. Okay, but I move to a more interesting question that is the material modeling. Following the model of Arvo and Talley, the macro scale was modeled with a simple polygonal plane. For the mesoscalar and the color, we used a multi-texture method with a 4 map, the albedo, the normals, the depth, and the specular. I give some information about normal maps and depth map extraction. For what concerns normal map reconstruction, we used photometric stereo techniques that basically is the classical full light imaging. The solution implemented was the solution by Professor Roy Burns of 2015 with some improvement. I could explain the improvement. Okay, I can show the result. This is the image. This is the normal map. And on the left, you have the old technique, and on the right, the new technique using the improved method. Okay. For what concerns the IMAP reconstruction, typically is a two-step process. The first process is the gradient map reconstruction. The second is the displacement of the normal direction of the drawing plane. But we had problems due to some inaccuracies caused by a not perfectly regular distribution of the lighting despite the flat field regularization, and inaccuracy of the position measurements of the full lights, that is the violation of the condition of distant light. And we obtained this geometry that is not correct. For this reason, we introduced two extra steps, that is a new lighting decay correction using the lightness channel on the gray card image, and the normal map reconstruction using the Cox and Burns technique. For what concerns the gradient map reconstruction, we used as commercial software, which allowed to minimize cumulative errors due to residual noise. Okay, and this is the new map. Okay, here you can see the result. On the right, you have a photo of the study for the adoration of the Magi, and on the left, a rendering using Corona rendering. Okay, for what concerns the paper, the micro scale, we introduced a new paper BRDF and a shader that was inspired to this paper of Erik Van Jensen on appearance of paper 2014 that exploit the Walt Disney physically based shading framework by Brett Barley, and was implemented in the Unity rendering engine system. The paper was modeled as material highly scattering, optically thick, which exhibit a combination of subsurface scattering, specular reflection, retroreflection, surface sheen, and transmission effects. I skip some detail about the BRDF model, and I show the result. On the left, here you can see the paper. On the left, the old shader with, you can see too much highlight, and this is the new shader. And here you can see the iron gull ink. On the left, the old shader. On the right, the new solution that present the highlight where the highlight are effectively. Okay. This is easily. You can zoom in, you can pan, you can change the light position from zenithal to raking light. You can link detail of the drawing to textual or 2D images information. You can examine, for example, here, and mainly you can rotate and the drawing, and you can see the front and the back, and you move newly to the front. That is important to correctly analyze the drawing. Okay, what's happened? Now the drawing is in exhibition. Our application is in exhibition at Museo Leonardiano in Vinci, and this is the opening day with. Before an important person was here from Netherlands. Here, this important person from Italy for us is our okay, and also is in print a paper with a new insight on the landscape 5 August 43, using easily as a technique to examine the drawing. Thank you very much for your attention.
So I'm aware 20 minutes goes by very fast. But that's why we have a question and a Q&A afterwards. And you probably will know how to find people if you have more questions. So for the third presenter in this session, I want to invite Jay.
Hi, I'm Jay Mullen. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be presenting on the Science History Institute. of which I don't think any of you guys know about. So let me do a brief introduction about my work there. So we're a relatively new institution. We're located in Philly, and I'm presenting today on a toxic collection of instruments and devices I photographed. The Science Institute has been in this building since 2008. We're really quite new though. I'm the first photographer they've hired. So it's been quite of an adjustment kind of getting them to think with images. So here we're part of a library, museum, and exhibit space. Below we have a fantastic collection of alchemical paintings, actually from here. In the museum, this is our new kind of multi-million-dollar kind of table that you can kind of access the images. So a lot of the kind of collection images I'm making are found different kind of routes in the institution and then online. So a lot of them will be featured in this kind of like movable user-operated kind of system of a table. We're in Philly. So Philly is an exciting place to be. Just kind of some maps of where we are. So to show you some important people in Philly. We have Rocky, we have Gritty, our new mascot. We do have a lot better food than a cheesesteak, but the Science History Institute is only a block away from the Liberty Bell. And this is Philly with the Philadelphia Museum of Art and that skyline. So at the Science History Institute, we do a lot of collecting. So we have archives, rare books, photographs, and a fine art collection, and museum objects and oral histories. The oral histories will be online soon as well. We're just working on the transcripts. So basically, we started this digital repository software that's all custom built. We have two full-time coders that are working on software that's customized Sophia front end with a Samvera stack, and it's all open source. Please come to the website. You can look at all the work on GitHub and download all the code. And it's been great to kind of work with them on digital zoom features and other features that'll be coming out. And to kind of go back to Justina's question earlier, they're not happy with the software and they're making an entirely new one that will be starting next year, and this is a year old. So we've been kind of measuring things with numbers. We've been pretty busy. We've only launched in 2018, so these are kind of our kind of statistical numbers. So I've been photographing a lot of library items, museum items, and items with multiple shots. Our digital audience, these are recent metrics from a year of being online. And again, these are photographs from our collection as well on the right. We have an amazing collection of photographs from different chemical companies as part of their archives. So please check us out on our new website. Netherlands is number 10, so we need to raise that number. But please check us out. In addition to the kind of collection site, we also offer making podcasts. So these are different images for podcast covers that I made, ranging from an opioid epidemic to treating migraines with marijuana, to desalination, to hoof and mouth disease. They're really fun, you should check it out. So first steps, what are the kind of priorities? This is a slide I made to kind of present to the library. Because I work between a library and a museum, and being the first photographer, I had to kind of explain how photographs are made for them. So the first steps were kind of figuring out what their kind of priorities are. And for the pesticide cans, they were very much interested in the kind of text. So a lot of times, seeing these objects for the first time, my background is entirely in art. I have no science background to know this is a early 1940s Petri dish vessel for making penicillin. So doing some Google research to find out how these things are supposed to be sitted, or what is the front of it, it often comes up when kind of exploring these objects that I have very little idea to do with. Also, a lot of the work has to be transformative. Moving this 3-ton crystal puller out of the gallery would not be possible. So trying to come up with photography solutions for objects that are a little unwieldy. These are some typical kind of objects that we have in the collection, mainly made of different materials and different time periods. Kind of a funny anecdote with this kind of chemistry set. We're also known for our chemistry sets. Was I had to email back the museum registrar to put the uranium back into the chemistry set to photograph it. We also have some Bakelite jewelry. This is an early blood machine that had to have their mercury removed from it. Minerals, early Jasperware conservation to a 1970s kind of prototype breast implant. We have a HP 35 calculator from 1974. And which is quite fun to kind of pair with these kind of an alchemical painting from 1936. We also have, these are some of the Dutch paintings that we have in our collection that were quite fun to do. Apparently this one has a kind of a funny joke to it, the one on the right. Apparently, you could probably correct me, but alchemist in Dutch means like gone to shit. Is that true? But I was told that this is the kind of the visual of it, with the baby kind of soiling their diaper in the background. It's supposed to be kind of a visual pun. We also have an amazing collection of modern books. These are from, we have a large collection of Dyes and Dyeing, and a large medical book. This one's from 1884, and our modern collection starts at 1851. We also have some classic rare books in our collection, like Alentafugians and some Newton manuscripts. And again, we don't have the resources. I'm open to any sort of multispectral sort of collaborations. We do have some really cool stuff. And this is Hoch's Micrographia, which leads me to why I'm here to talk to you about DDT. So DDT sort of has an interesting origin story. Since I'm not a scientist, I had to kind of research a little of this. It was originally found in 1874 by Ziegler, who discovered DDT. And all the kind of research I did on it, they kind of slighted him. Apparently, like, he might have graduated graduate school at age 12, but there's not much information that I found. The person who gets all the kind of credit is Paul Muller, known as Pauli Muller. And so in 1939, he synthesized DDT, which was sort of first used against the Colorado potato beetle and the Swiss government, which led to a series of patents for the US and Switzerland. And he basically receives a Nobel Prize in 1948. And it has sort of an interesting story. So we have these kind of digital artifacts, and here's sort of a propaganda video from Silent Spring, which I'll talk about momentarily, just talking about the kind of greatness for this chemical. And again, this is leading to kind of a wartime victory in terms of increasing crops being grown, food production was increased. So this is kind of an amazing drug at this point. People are like wowed from it. It's saving millions of lives of malaria, typhoid. But here's a kind of a very short clip.
It begins with the war-born development of DDT. This diabolical weapon of modern science saved millions of humans, but killed billions of insects. Man, with this newly discovered force, has at long last gained the upper hand in our age-old struggle. Just like these mosquito larvae, it came from laboratories where top scientists from famous universities and from industrial and government organizations collaborated to develop something new and different. They succeeded. Once a bug comes in contact with DDT, he's lost. All he has to do is just walk on any pest-broid-feeded surface. DDT is absorbed through the feet and spreads throughout the insect's entire nervous system. The effect is disastrous. DDT seems to literally drive bugs crazy. But not for long. DDT next paralyzes, then kills. The same deadly effectiveness of the liquid form is found in the pest-broid powder. It is so easy to apply because of a new efficient dispenser package. All people have to do is to press the patented top like this. It's a handful of concentrated death. It contains stabilized haricrum, an ingredient which literally stampedes insects from their hiding places to bring them into contact with DDT, indoors or outdoors. Stirs them up, drives them out of cracks and crevices.
So as you're spraying your anthills in your backyard, something to keep in mind. And these are also ads from our collection, which is kind of nice to tie in kind of propaganda from the time. And yeah. Maybe I need help. All right, so these are some other ads from our collection. They're kind of like, very much the ads were kind of geared towards kind of a domesticity and geared towards the safety and having kind of this post-war like American life with kind of treating your kind of daily issues with bugs with this. This is a bomb version, which I have some slides later of. This is literally in a Time magazine in 1954 ad claiming that DDT is good for you. So literally like, this is in the mid-50s, like this is led to huge growths in kind of profit, and millions of tons of this material was used. And again, kind of playing to people's kind of fears. These are some ads kind of talking about your child being defenseless and to use this very deadly pesticide to help your child.
Tons of DDT are used in this fight against the dread disease, whose principal target is the young. Again, war has contributed one of its discoveries to save life.
Public Health Department staged demonstrations to convince the public of DDT's effectiveness and safety. Enthusiasm for the chemical knew no bounds, and few were questioning the wisdom of such use.
I mean, it becomes comic, but people literally would chase the truck around because people didn't know where polio was coming from yet. So here are some other ads that do roaches spread cancer, and these amazing kind of sprayers that I kind of want to do more research on because they're pretty fascinating. So again, just different ads in our collection that kind of deal with like how these insects are kind of perceived and kind of, again, the kind of domestic and sort of national kind of qualities to them. So it can't be overstated enough how important Rachel Carson is, kind of talking about the DDT story. She wrote this best-selling book, among many other things, Silent Spring. It came out in 1962. It was a New York Times bestseller. It sold a ridiculous amount of copies. And again, like, she started the environmental movement. So again, like, kind of seeing and understanding these objects is sort of impossible without recognizing her. After her book launched, a year later, the Clean Air Act was made, the Wilderness Act. And these are also some sort of fan anime art that we have in the collection as well that deal with Rachel Carson. So just, again, her impact is hugely influential to kind of understanding society's implications and cultural understanding of these toxins. So basically in 1972, DDT is banned for agricultural use. So it kind of, like, the public kind of shift of these materials radically shifted. But everyone's understanding of DDT coming through this kind of timeline, my understanding of DDT was a little different. My understanding of DDT was through wrestling. DDT is the most popular wrestling move in America. Black Gorman was the Zietler of the DDT. He kind of discovered it, but didn't take much credit. Jake the Snake Roberts is best known for the DDT as a finishing move. He started wrestling in 1974. The timelines match up exactly perfectly. The first national televised DDT was on in '86 on Saturday night's main event. This is Jake with his snake. So just to give you an idea of the kind of variety of DDT and how much kind of proliferation happened in terms of different companies getting into the pesticide business, here's a video to illustrate kind of what the DDT move looks like in its various variations. Sorry. So you can see there's a lot of variations of the DDT, and a lot of evolution has gone into that. Jake the Snake Roberts is known as a finisher move, and the DDT is so popular, in fact, this is a contemporary Japanese promotion of wrestling that the company is called DDT, and it's promoting wrestling. All that aside, this brings me to safety and handling. So safety and handling is really important for DDT because it's absorbed through the skin, inhalation, and ingestion. So I was lucky enough to have a really wonderful museum collections staff who kind of helped me and set me up with a respirator that's OSHA approved. I wore lots of nitrile gloves, and really coming up with a system to not touch stuff was really difficult, especially kind of coming with some of the health issues made it seem sort of critical. A lot of these are things that I kind of grew up with, but so acute short-term effects, including headache. I read a lot of tests on mice for hemi-seizures are an okay amount of seizures for mice to have. But again, this is sort of deadly material. Again, the kind of environmental impacts have been kind of widely discussed, but these are sort of like long-term effects for individuals coming into contact with it. So working issues with storage of DDT. So a lot of issues came up with these things that are encapsulated in plastic need to off-gas for a certain amount of time. They also weren't organized by date or anything else. So when kind of photographing a collection of it, you might want to order them in some way, but they were organized by how much toxic material is left in the containers versus the weight of the actual container or the size of the container. So organizing the kind of shooting of them became kind of critical to reduce handling. So they kind of had like a plastic blanket on them, and they kind of off-gassed on an open ventilated floor, and then I received them later. So who collects this stuff? So basically we got this collection from this guy, Phil Allegretti. He was a full-time, I guess, exterminator who started collecting these cans to his own amusement in 1980. He is a member of his exterminating, I don't know, union in Naples, Idaho. And so he started collecting these things. So some of the issues that I had with it was these aren't necessarily the best versions of the things, or do we need to really document the ones with all the scuffs on it? So again, it has the provenance of coming from this exterminator and their kind of collection. So that's how we sort of ended up with this collection. So the goals of digitization were preservation, access, safety, and availability for research and readability of text. I work with all these like PhD text people, and they just want to read stuff. So for them, the priority was just reading the text. Preservation was really important because no one wants to take the stuff out of storage again. So that leads us to digital access to these materials. And we do have a fellowship program as well. So they're interested in a lot of the ads and other things. So making this material ready for the researchers to come in is a good first step to making this available. So creating standardization of the process for photographing this collection was sort of difficult. I ended up going with focus stacking using Helcon Focus software, again, just to set up the lights in a few different ways. So I had a softbox kind of from above to get a general, since the shapes and materials kind of shifted radically, for them, I thought the best way to kind of shoot them all the same and then kind of worry with some of the light conditions later. So I focus stacked them using an umbrella on the side to generate a shadow to give it some sort of depth. Like that was sort of my artistic interpretation of the can. So in a poetic way, those are focus stacked shadows. But the idea was to blend it with on the curved metal surfaces. A lot of the text was difficult to read. So covering multiple angles to get all the text was very much paramount. So a lot of the cans on the first round had 16 shots to get the depth of field right from the front to the back of the can, so I wouldn't have to remeasure focus. So once I had the kind of cans in place, the light and the focus would be constant, even if the can was changing size or shape. And of course, failures definitely happened. These are some early kind of tests. And another issue, again, if I was given an opportunity to do this again, would be to try to slow down. I guess I had a bunch of people breathing down my neck to hurry up and get this toxic stuff away. But again, coming up with the kind of most banal kind of way of reading and kind of dealing with these kind of materials was important. So having be able to read on the curve was sort of annoying kind of sort of compromise to get to, especially when trying to show the materials of these as well. This is kind of a common kind of sprayer we have. And just as a kind of a case of trivia, does anyone know what illustrator made work for Flint? Anyone? Anyone recognize that? So Dr. Seuss was the illustrator for Flint. There's like so many bizarre tangents that I found in doing this research, but Dr. Seuss did a lot of his original kind of creations in animals were to support and promote this pesticide. So the cans and stuff are, I think, quite remarkable. Like I love how kind of nostalgic they are, even though this is from the 1960s. But there's something kind of like endearing about these kind of cans and kind of treating them as objects, even though we can't really touch them and people will not be seeing these in person anytime soon. But I really am kind of taken with the kind of design of a lot of them. It's nice to be able to kind of share them with a larger public. So a lot of the other items had kind of components to them that they wanted photographed that don't necessarily make nice photographs. So a lot of them are kind of decrepit cardboard boxes that they came in, but just trying to show the materiality and kind of corrosion of these objects. So they're not just sort of manufactured objects kind of showing their wear and culture, but also showing the individual wear of them as individual objects. So yeah, it's kind of a fun project to kind of do and kind of keep a lot of, I used kind of blending to kind of get some of the shadows to kind of fall in place with these kind of curved surfaces. And the tops were especially difficult to try rendering because of some of the corrosion. With the deep zoom view on the website, some of them, they offered too much detail and it would kind of fall apart. So there's still things that need to be kind of worked out. And this is our most popular downloaded ad, which happens to be this pesticide. So again, we do have ads that kind of coincide that talk to the kind of life of these pesticides. And we have a lot of journals and the archives of the Hercules Chemical Power Company that also has a lot of these pesticides in it. So again, kind of seeing the different ways of kind of imaging these, keeping it as simple as kind of possible, to again, for legibility, and reading these ingredients. This one you're supposed to kind of put and expose and just like walk away after you set it. I think it's pretty toxic. So I just want to give special thanks to Hilary Kativa. She did the digital metrics. Ashley did the library reference. Stephanie Lemkin did the collections manager, provided safety and guidance. You just missed this wrestling show when they came to America. But thank you very much.
I would like to invite the presenters to take a chair, and then Robert Ertman will moderate the questions. If you have any questions, I do hope so.
Questions? Well, I have one for Keith. Actually, a couple for Keith. First, a very technical question, and then a more broad one. The color filter that's built into a typical digital camera, the red filter, does it have an upper wavelength cutoff?
With the longer wavelengths than the near infrared.
Yeah, in other
So
words,
all of
by
the-
removing the red filter, do you enable the camera to see more infrared beyond removal of the normal infrared filter?
That is a good question. I would have to look at the comparison. I did not do measurements with a camera that only had the IR filter removed, so I was only looking at the monochrome. But there is some data out there, so could look at that and let you know.
Okay. And then a second question that's more broad about your background. You're a very unusual case of a photographer who decided to go into research and then get a PhD. And I know that that then prepares you for doing research in the museum, but for all the photographers here who think about possible careers in research, do you have any insights or advice or surprises from your experience?
I'm not quite done with the PhD part, but I'm very close, so there's still some like trauma in that. It's been an amazing opportunity, and I think it's going to open up a lot of possibilities for doing research at the Smithsonian and with what I was doing. What I was 5 years ago, before starting the program, I was kind of reaching my limit and what I could do on my own with the research. And so has allowed me to connect with a lot of people, to learn a whole lot, and enhance my research skills. And so I think there will be a lot more potential when I finish this up and can see what direction I'm going to head in.
All right, we'll ask you in a couple of years then, I guess. Do we have questions from the audience? Yes, in the back, please.
What challenges do I encounter if I want a modified camera? Can I just send it to Canon with a question, and is it very expensive?
I don't think Canon's going to do this for you.
So who will?
It actually will ruin the manufacturer guarantee for that. But there are companies out there that will do the modification. There are YouTube videos out there if you want to do it yourself.
Okay.
You can do the monochrome conversion on your own, but it involves using like a wooden stick and scratching the surface of the sensor, which is a little risky.
Okay, it sounded so simple.
Removing the IR cut filter, I think, is a little bit easier. But you were asking about the challenges of getting the modification done or the challenges of having a modified camera?
Well, it's a combination, I think.
So there's at least 2 or 3 companies in the US that do it. There may be a company or so in Europe that are doing it. So you can send it off or purchase a camera. And then for the most part, I think people are using the standard software and accessories that you're using for standard documentation, and I think that can work for the most part, but I think it is important to understand some of the limitations and what the modification is doing. So the work that I shared was starting to look at some of those limitations and really better understanding the camera.
Thank you.
Other questions? I have one for Jay. I presume that these objects will never actually be on exhibition. Is that right?
It's unlikely.
So given that fact, and given that many of these objects are not familiar, it seems to me that there's an important aspect of scale. Like, how big is this thing? For certain things like a can, I can kind of imagine, but for others, I don't have a sense. Do you have ideas about how best to present the scale to the audience?
It's a really good point. I don't actually, because the scale will change. I guess let's say I had a ruler in it, but it could be projected quite big for the table, or it could be. That's an interesting issue. I think one I'll definitely have to consider more. But yeah, we don't have a real way of dealing with scale in that way, or any of the photography really, for that matter. So it hasn't been an interest of the curators, but I think we don't have that kind of research happening, but I could see it being definitely a need if it did happen.
Okay. And then for the 2 Da Vinci drawing presenters, is the software that you used an open source thing? Can I use it? Can I play with it?
For the moment, just the part of software that is about the color correction is open source, okay? But the final application, no more for the moment, but we hope in 1 year to be possible to have a version that could be open source.
Okay, thank you. And a very technical question then. To obtain the shape of the surface, are you basically taking the normal map and integrating that? So you take a gradient?
Yes, absolutely. Normal map and displacement map, 2 maps. Because you have 2 different range for what concern the sign of the pen. You have a thickness of from 5 to 10 micron, and also the paper. But the paper you have a different type of thickness, because a range between 0.1 millimeter to 1 millimeter or 2 millimeters, and you need to use 2 different maps. Because if you use just 1 map, you can or skip fine detail or skip the macro scale of the shape of the paper, because the drawing are not planar. Okay.
Yeah, so you have features at 2 different scales.
So 2 different scales, 2 different maps.
Yeah, I see. Okay. Yes. Question here, please.
Jay, I'm Elad. I'm a photographer of the Art Museum in Holocaust Museum of Yad Vashem. I want to ask, how do you deal with the authentic
different versions with different shadows?
No, do you do a sharpening or a saturation? Or do you give us the more authentic picture?
Sure. So the images were made in, for the cans, for instance, like they were made into 3 stacks of the 16 images each. And then, so they would have that data from the slices? Is that, I guess I'm, and then I would work them in Photoshop, and I would do a small bit of sharpening just to compensate for, I mean, very little actually, but I try keeping it as natural as possible. Just the information that's in the photographs. I'm not doing any curves or anything to it.
Quick question for Jay. You spoke a little bit about steps that you take for your own personal safety, but can you talk a little bit more about managing contamination to like your studio, your equipment? Is there things that you do, disposing of backdrops, etc.?
Sure, good question. This was very atypical. Most of the materials that have been toxic haven't been this, and the procedure was just to throw out all the backdrops. So any of the kind of temporary kind of like black cards, I threw everything out. So the idea was just that it would be kind of contaminated and just to throw out the entire set. For other issues, we had a complete radiological survey of the materials, and there were quite a few radiological materials that have been tested, but the radiation amounts are quite low. So there are other toxic materials I probably will be dealing with, but those will be more radioactive.
I think we have time for, there's one question over here, please, and then this will be our last question. Oh, sorry?
I was.
Okay, 2 more.
This is for Marco. Can you talk about the lighting that was used for the photometric stereo? What kind of lighting system?
Okay. We used 4 illuminators with LED lighting.
The geometry? The geometry?
We use a 45-degree geometry for the 4 lighting.
I guess what I'm asking about is what kind of reflectors, or theoretically the light's supposed to be collimated for the photometric stereo. So I'm wondering what you might have done or did you to sort of collimate the lighting for the 4 lights?
I not have this is a good question. Okay. But basically, we not used any other trick than the simple light, and we just put on or off the 4 lights, and that's usual. And using the LED lighting is much better than fluorescent lighting, because you can just put on off and this done. Otherwise, you need to have a long time for the drawing if this is not so good for the drawing, because it's very fragile.
Hello. Okay, this is a question for Marco. I was wondering if have you tried or think of outputting your data set into the real world? I mean, 3D output it, or in a way, and if it's possible with the data that you have recorded.
To put our system to measure 3D
with the data that you have recorded, the 3D data that you have generated, if you have think about materializing it, making it physical, into a facsimile, for example, something like that. And if it's possible.
Also, in theory, it's possible, because from the maps you can have a shape. Okay. In practice, it's not easy. I can, for example, for the landscape drawing, because it's impossible to put in exhibition more than 6 weeks in Vinci. We do it a replica, but is completely manual from using the images just as a template. Okay.
Join me in thanking our speakers again.